Yeah, good morning.
Good
morning.
Good
So,
morning. Good
a
morning.
very good morning to everybody.
Yeah.
Again, welcome to the second and the final day of our conference. Today, we will begin with a keynote session, as part of which we have three very distinguished scholars from the field of psychology with us. And we have with us Professor Sonia Suchday as the first keynote speaker. She will be delivering a talk on spirituality and globalization. For the second keynote lecture, we have with us Professor Manas Kumar Mandal, who will be delivering a talk on the science of happiness, unanswered questions. And this session, which is going to run till 10:30 a.m., will be chaired by Professor Rajbir Singh. Now, to introduce the speakers, firstly, Professor Sonia Suchday. She is a clinical health psychologist with over 25 years of experience. A first-generation immigrant from Mumbai, India to the US, she is a dedicated leader, educator, program builder, and researcher. She has embraced diversity in every aspect of her life, research, education, and leadership. She is currently professor and chair of the psychology department at Pace University, New York. Professor Suchday is also a member of the Pace University Board of Trustees. She is the former chair of the US National Committee on Psychological Sciences at the National Academy of Sciences and is a representative of the International Union of Psychological Sciences to the United Nations. As the former founding co-director of the Institute of Public Health Sciences at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Professor Suchday has extensive experience in building international educational and research programs, as well as international partnerships. Her research spans diverse interdisciplinary topics, such as the effects of anger and hostility on health, acculturation among Chinese immigrants, and the effects of globalization in emergent markets, such as India. Her recent work includes the effects of spirituality on health and well-being. And just to inform everyone, it is pretty late at ma'am's place. It's around 10:30 p.m. and we are extremely grateful to have you with us. And it's an absolute honor and privilege to welcome you.
Thank you.
Next, we have with us Professor Manas Kumar Mandal. He is a distinguished visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and adjunct professor at National Institute of Advanced Sciences and at Allahabad University. And he is an emeritus professor at Rashtriya Raksha University, formerly a distinguished scientist and director general of life sciences in DRDO, which is the Defense Research and Development Organization. Professor Mandal specializes in the areas of neuropsychology and cognitive sciences. He was elected as the fellow of National Association of Psychology in India in 2012. And for his contribution to military psychology, he was given the Technology Leadership Award by the then Defense Minister of India and the Scientist of the Year Award by the Prime Minister of India in 2006. Dr. Mandal has to his credit over 14 books, more than 100 research papers in international journals of high repute, with 7,000 plus international citations of research work. So we are really honored to have you as one of our keynote speakers for our conference.
Thank you.
And now moving to the session chair, Professor Rajbir Singh. He is the Dean and Professor at the Faculty of Behavioral Sciences in SGT University, Gurgaon. He has personally made significant research contributions for the benefit of village people, health and well-being under the UGC SAP project, which lasted from 2004 to 2014 on health psychology. He has also completed the DST-sponsored project on cognitive preparedness from 2014 to 2016. Professor Rajbir Singh is a life member of Indian Science Congress Association and Indian Association of Applied Psychology. He has published 7 books and over 70 research articles in national and international journals of repute. And we're extremely privileged to have Sir as an advisory committee member of NPPA. In fact, he was also one of the scientific committee members for our conference. Sir, I now hand over the session to you and request you to please lead the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. And good evening, Professor Sonia. since you're there in the late evening. We have a very exciting session, and both the talks which have been planned and the speakers are very learned ones. And I think that all those who are attending this particular session will certainly be benefited by two of the very key important issues for us, which is always enigmatic for everyone, what happiness is and how spirituality can be obtained. Even there is a lot of convergence between two things. And globalization and spirituality, whether spirituality all over the world is one and the same thing, or whether the spirituality will lead us to happiness, or happiness would certainly be going to help us to achieve spirituality. So incidentally, both the topics are so much intervened within the framework of positive psychology. And I think that both the talks would be wonderfully delivered today, and all those would certainly be benefited. I think that we can have a session now planned. First, I will request Sonia Suchday to deliver her lecture. And then I think that the question answers, we can have some time for 5 to 10 minutes for some selected question answers. Then Professor Mandal will be delivering his talk, and again then 5 to 10 minutes we can have for some of the important sessions. And at the end, we may have a common question answer session or a discussion sort of thing. So I think that we have now left with about 80 minutes or so. So with that for the lecture, and then the remaining part for the discussion. So 40 minutes would be, I think, better, Professor Sonia and Professor Mandal. Would it be okay? Yeah. So first I invite Professor Sonia Suchday to deliver her talk on globalization and spiritualization.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I get you to, is that Shilpa? Can I get you to
I'm sharing the
slides? Yeah, because my system is crashing when I'm
sure, ma'am. And as and when you need me to change the slide, you can just tell me to move to the next slide.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So if you just want to do the slideshow. Thank you. All right. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting me and for your kind words of welcome. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be here. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about globalization, a little bit about spirituality, and some about the importance of context in understanding these concepts and in the intermingling of ideas, values, and concepts of spirituality in a globalized world. Next paragraph, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the traditional definition of globalization is that it's a process of progressive integration of economies. It's a very economically based definition which talks about capital flows, which is money flowing from one place to another, migration, which is people flowing from one place to another, and the speed of technology moving from one part of the world to another part of the world. In other words, conceptually, it's talking about the integration of national economies into an international economy. Next slide, please. However, globalization is a lot more than just economics. It is the progressive integration, exchange, and consequences of people, processes, and products interacting with each other. And whenever you have such an interaction, you have new avenues of growth and opportunity. Next slide, please. The implications of this are that as the process of globalization untwines, unfolds in front of all of us, there is change in the material world, in psychological concepts, experiences, The social world around us changes, and therefore the spiritual world around us also shifts as a result of it. And there is a biopsychosocial and spiritual adaptation to diverse pieces of information. Next slide, please. So as we begin to globalize, we really are having to face what Hofstede said, that the survival of mankind will depend to a large extent on the ability of people who think differently to act together. Next slide, please. Most concepts need to be understood in context, and so too does the concept of globalization. Next slide, please. So now moving over to spirituality. Spirituality is universal, it's multidimensional, and it is universally associated with physical and mental health as well as well-being. And the core dimensions of spirituality, as you look at it being defined all over the world, there are some commonalities or orthogonal concepts that are associated with it, which is a belief in a higher power, search for meaning. It's a state of mind, and it's a feeling of security. Next slide, please. So many aspects of spirituality are contextual. They're based on religion, culture, zeitgeist, which is the moment and the times. And as there is a change in context, the question comes up, is there a shift in meaning and manifestation of spiritual concepts? In the past, spirituality traveled with people, and today spiritual beliefs practiced in far-off corners of the world are integrated into our daily routines. And I will expand on that point in the next few slides. The next, please. So I will take yoga and meditation as an ongoing example to talk about some of these concepts. We know yoga and meditation have been around in Eastern cultures since the Indus Valley civilization, which is about 3000 BC. It is the joining of Prakriti and Purush, which is nature and spirit. And traditional purpose was a pathway to transcend superficial and limited realities to achieve a state of what we think of as pure consciousness or oneness with infinity. In other words, it is about harmonizing the mind, body, soul, nature, and spirit. Next slide, please. The dimensions of yoga refer to universal ethics, individual ethics, physical postures, breath control, control of the senses, concentration, meditation, and bliss. Next slide, please. In a practical sense, yoga and meditation are about achieving optimal functioning, and it is through a synergistic and disciplined life, which includes being a vegetarian, early morning practice, moderation in words, deeds, and behavior, and selfless compassion. So it talks about attitudes, it talks about behaviors, it talks about practices, and it talks about health habits as well. Practices interact with the body's natural healing mechanisms and homeostatic balance to restore the body and create optimal functioning with the body. Next slide, please. In the West, we have the biopsychosocial model of health. As you know, the West began with a much more biomedical model, which focused on specialization. And from there, we moved to a biopsychosocial model of health, where we are focusing on biological aspects, psychological aspects, and social cultural aspects. Next slide, please. I think I've already gone through this, so can we move to the next one, please? Most importantly, when we translate these concepts to the Eastern world, we've got to include the concept of spirituality, because it is very germane to the existence of people, at least in the Eastern Hemisphere. And I would argue that it is also germane to people in the Western Hemisphere, but it has attracted less attention, except, maybe in the past 20 years, it has attracted more attention, but historically, it has attracted less attention in the West. Next slide, please. The application of biopsychosocial model in Eastern cultures is a little bit different than what it is in the West. The emphases may differ, where the focus is on social rather than biological and psychological aspects of functioning. There's a fusion of the psychological and social, where there is an emphasis on interdependent self-control. Even the emphasis on well-being may differ, with differential importance given to hedonia and eudaimonia. Next slide, please. So Western versus Eastern models of care. Western models are focused, like I said, biomedical tradition. The emphasis is on a single component intervention, which is we try to change one aspect of a person's functioning and use that as a mechanism of dealing with the disease. So whether we are changing behavior or cognitive appraisals, or we are focusing on emotion regulation. Eastern healing traditions have always focused on the idea that the human being is a dynamic, fluid, complex being, where there is personal, relational aspects, environmental, physical aspects, and philosophical and moral interactions, which determine optimal functioning. Conceptualizing problems in the Western world, we are confronting weakness, removing symptoms and problems. In the Eastern world, problems are resolved on strength and synergy, spirituality via an integrative framework. Next slide, please. So in other words, what we are talking about is homeostasis versus harmony. Next slide. Yoga and meditation in the West with globalization. When I first came to the United States, I would be hard pressed to find anybody who knew about yoga and meditation, who was practicing yoga and meditation regularly. With time passing, I cannot walk more than 2 to 3 blocks in New York City without seeing some sign for a yoga studio or a meditation class somewhere. The popularity of yoga and meditation emerged in the 60s and 70s. It was originally part of the Beatles' pop culture. They helped popularize some of the yoga and meditation, and it coincided with the movement in the East in the 50s and 60s. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was a great proponent of some of these concepts and practices in the West. Next slide, please. Today, yoga and meditation in the West is part of popular culture. It is part of science. It is part of practice-oriented professions, whether we are talking about medicine, psychology, neuroscience. It's a part of what we think of as complementary and alternative medicine, holistic health culture, and it's also part of the spa culture. If you want to move to the next slide, please. So in the West, the question is the yoga and meditation that is being practiced in the West the same thing as what is being practiced in the East? In the West, it's considered a tool, a mechanism of achieving an end, and sometimes there is even a discomfort with the spiritual and the mystical aspects of yoga and meditation. In the East, we are talking about a holistic integration of mind, body, soul, spirit, and a celebration of the spiritual and the mystical aspects of yoga. Next slide, please. Even the words that are used in the West and the East differ. If you hear the Dalai Lama, he talks about method and wisdom. related to yoga and meditation. And in the West, we have John Kabat-Zinn, who's a very well-known researcher and teacher of yoga and meditation, has done some pretty incredible work on looking at the cognitive behavioral conceptualization of things like yoga and meditation. He teaches two parts of it. It's instrumental and the non-instrumental. Next slide, please. Western and Eastern methods of human functioning and growth. It's about different ways to different ends. The East emphasizes on ultimate unity with the infinite via internal growth. And the West focuses on achievement of personal potential via skills that will enable you to navigate the world around you. Next slide, please. The Western and Eastern methods of coping. Conflict is dealt with by assertive expression. Let's talk about it is a very popular Western way of confronting challenges and issues. And in the East, conflict is focused on managing your internal responses, because the idea is to preserve the relationship rather than preserve your internal sense of comfort with whatever is going on. Next slide, please. The worldviews in terms of scientific inquiry are also different. And any scientific inquiry will carry with it the worldviews of the context from which it emerges. Next slide, please. Eastern and Western methods of science. The West is focused on more mechanistic, linear cause and effect, isolation of various components. And the East is more focused on contextual and dynamic aspects of health and functioning. Next slide, please. So in terms of the impact of yoga and meditation, there has been an enormous amount of research done in the West on the autonomic nervous system, on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortex, in cognitive neuroscience, on brain mapping, and looking at the effects of yoga and meditation on attention, concentration, memory, various cognitive functions. Next slide, please. What is intriguing is that you have the Eastern ways of exploring certain concepts, certain sciences, and you have the Western ways of exploring the same sciences and the concepts. And there is some corroboration of data between the two. For example, according to the yoga principles, the key ingredient for a long and healthy life is fasting or limited consumption of food and a focus on simple food. And data from the West is now emerging, which shows that restricted food consumption is the key to dealing with chronic disease and related death and disability. Again, I can give multiple different examples. One of them is, of course, the yogic lifestyle emphasizes on early morning practice. And we now know from metabolic syndrome disorders literature that any kind of exercise early in the morning actually has more benefits in terms of speeding up your metabolic rate for the rest of the day. So again, we can come up with multiple other examples like this. Next slide, please. So I think I don't want to run out of time, so I'm just going to skip over this one, if you will, please. Next slide. Meditation is integrated in various forms of psychotherapy, like mindfulness-based cognitive therapies, dialectical behavior therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy. And it is within these therapies that you see some of the most intriguing linkages between the East and the West. Next slide, please. The conceptualization of these therapies is that suffering is a function of language that we sometimes use to pathologize normal human experiences. It is out of fusing of your identity with the stories that you tell, I was ill-treated by my parents, I was not very well, everybody, I experienced constant bad luck, I have suffered all my life, my stars are like that. So your suffering is a function of your cognitive narratives. It's the stories that you have created to live with your experiences. Next slide, please. Most psychological phenomena function within a context. In other words, if you get depressed, how much of that depression is related to those cognitive narratives which form the context of your experiences? Next slide. And part of the therapeutic process is to enable you to develop the concept of psychological flexibility, which is accept what is out of your personal control, commit to a value-driven life to improve your life, and be mindful of every aspect of your life. And as you can see, there is very clear overlap with Eastern concepts of functioning and yoga and meditation. Next slide, please. So there are many challenges to integrating spiritual concepts across borders. As our borders have become more diffuse, these concepts have percolated all over the place. Next slide, please. And, just to reiterate, we are talking about Eastern and Western ways of viewing things. Next slide. Which may differ quite a bit from each other in terms of the focus, in terms of the perspective with which we look at it. Next slide. And there are many challenges to integrating spiritual concepts across global borders. What is important to note is that the manifestation of beliefs in the new contexts may be completely different from their native contexts. And the question becomes, is there still a value to them? And if so, what is the value? In other words, the research that is coming out of the West studying meditation and yoga is studying the various components of it. Is it really the same thing as the yogic lifestyle? So I will leave you with that question. Thank you very much for your attention. I think you can turn off the slide share, please.
Thank you, Professor Sonia. You have covered a very, very diverse aspects, and in a way, through global context, merging of East and West practices, leading to these days the third wave therapies we call usually. And there is a lot of commonality in these things. And this is what the spirituality concept and the practices have directly affected our lives as well as the people of others to achieve health and well-being. I'm sure there must be a few ideas. Shilpa, how we will be organizing then now? Are there a few questions can be taken within 5 minutes, please?
Okay, sir. So there's a question from Wilson, whose basically question to Dr. Sonia is that psychology in general has maintained a distance from spirituality and religion. Does the mainstream psychology accept spirituality as an essential aspect for mental health? Why? So this is the first question. So ma'am, should I tell you the second question as well, or would you like to take it up a little?
Why don't you tell me the second, and if it makes sense, I'll answer both together.
Right. In fact, this question is from Wilson as well. So you mainly talked about yoga and meditation in connection with spirituality. Are there other aspects that can be a part of spirituality? What about common religious practices?
Okay, so I will try to give a comprehensive answer as I can. If you want to just remind me, what is the first question again? It's about, you don't need to read the
why psychology is not accepting very well.
Yes. Okay. So I think the history of psychology has always been that it comes out of the biomedical model. And the biomedical model has gone towards specialization, kind of looking at every body part and every component and every cell as a very specialized entity. And it has received a lot of benefit. There's a lot of reinforcement because we have become very good at diagnosing illnesses. We've become very, very good at curing things. And because of psychology kind of aligning itself with the biomedical model, it has always ignored spirituality within the therapeutic process. And it was only about 15, 20 years ago, or, about 20, maximum 20 years ago, that psychology began acknowledging that spirituality is one of the most common human experience. And to the extent that applied psychology is about alleviating human suffering, how can you not take into account something that has universally, since time immemorial, been used by humanity to cope with suffering? So that, I would say, is the larger idea as to, and plus the biomedical model itself was moving towards the more biopsychosocial model. It was acknowledging that simply figuring out how cells and how cells behave doesn't provide us with the answer to health. You hand somebody who had a heart attack with a prescription saying exercise 3 times a day, don't get stressed, don't get angry, and make sure you eat only healthy foods. 90 out of 100, that prescription might as well be thrown out of the window. It's not going to happen. So biomedical model itself realized its failure with chronic disease and moved towards a more biopsychosocial model. And from there, the pathway to the spiritual model was not such a big leap anymore, because psychology itself was coming to that concept that you cannot keep ignoring spirituality. And what was the second question again? Just give me a quick bullet point.
The second question was, apart from yoga and meditation, are there any other spiritual techniques, and are there any common religious practices?
Of course, absolutely there are. I just chose to take yoga and meditation as an example because it is so prominent and easy to grasp. But there are, of course, multiple. I know Buddhism has had a huge influence in the West in terms of the ways that people are conceptualizing and coping. It's intriguing because in recent times, I have even come across Western authors that are starting to talk about this whole concept of non-duality and duality. Within Tibetan Buddhism, it's referred to under the concept of Dzogchen, and, which is again, a very, it's a much more abstract concept, and yet it has begun showing up within the West. So yoga and meditation to me are just the more obvious ones and the easiest to grasp within a 20-minute talk, I guess.
I think, Shilpa, we don't have any more scope for taking questions. So thank you, Prof. Sonia. And addressing Mr. Wilson's queries, I would like to add a few things that now psychology is certainly having more acceptance of spirituality related, studies and practices. It's all because of the revival was when the neurocognitive science has taken the studies of consciousness and the spirituality. Now this is more taken as a scientific concept. I think this is a better one. And if you want to add something else, there is a lot of practice with nature and nurture. Such interactions also enhances spirituality. And, there are some people who are practicing it. So this is something to add. So thank you, and I think we have Professor Manas Kumar Mandal now, who will be also talking on very closely in the same context on the science of happiness. And actually, many times we are seeking happiness through the spirituality also. So certainly some other questions would be taken in his talk itself. So Shilpa, may I now invite Professor Mandal to start his talk?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would like to share my slide first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I visible and audible too?
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So I'll take a slightly different view of what we have just listened to. Rather, I'll not that is diametrically opposite. But the science of happiness doesn't actually clash with our concept of spirituality. What Professor Rajveer Singh has just mentioned about it, the relationship is just not about comparability or compatibility between the two sciences. It's more about the complementarity of it. Actually, we know that our brain is predisposed to spirituality, but we do not have an answer whether God has created our brain wiring or our brain wiring has actually created in such a manner that we become predisposed to spirituality. So I can remind of two books, Why God Won't Go Away. It's a book by McGraw, and The God Part of the Brain by Alpert. They have actually narrated this concept of spirituality and science, that why they should not be considered opposite, orthogonal to each other, and why they are complementary to each other. So why I have given this backdrop is simply to create an introductory narrative for what I'm going to talk about, is the science of happiness. The science of happiness is something we have introduced in many institutions in the country. We have introduced it through a foundation in California in about 18 institutions in the country, mostly IITs, IIMs, and universities. And they are being run as a subject. And in IIT Kharagpur, we run 6 courses under the science of happiness. And roughly 5,000 students have already gone through these courses. And this has created a sensation actually for all of us. And I'm not here to talk that how great job we have done. My idea of talking to you is to help develop a little awareness that how it is different from the art of happiness that we talk about. This country is very rich about art of happiness, but the question remains that if we deal with art of happiness, we are talking about individuals trying to be happy. When individuals try to be happy, everybody has their own way of developing happiness. And we also know if you want to chase happiness, you will never be happy, you will remain unhappy. So our idea was that, is there any scientific principles behind happiness so that we can replicate it amongst others? So we start with the notion that can we create happiness? And if we can create happiness, probably that mass happiness will leave me in the ambience of happy people who will in turn make me happy, and I do not have to be happy otherwise individually. So last year when I was teaching in University of Pennsylvania, I had a long talk with Martin Seligman as well. In fact, I worked with him and I found a lot of differences between what he conceptualizes happiness and the way we conceptualize happiness. In fact, his conceptualization of happiness is more individually based and more in the sense of art of happiness. And what we want to promote is science of happiness. So let us see in the next 12 to 13 slides, what do we mean by science of happiness? But I will leave the audience with a lot of questions, because here the purpose of doing this kind of workshops is not to let people know what I know. Rather, I believe that every answer that I give should raise more questions for the audience so that people can do some kind of researches in their field. So with this notion, let me start. So we believe, when we started a science of happiness, we started calling it, we started in 6 years back actually. We call it as a transdisciplinary science. A transdisciplinary science is a science which is neither multidisciplinary nor interdisciplinary. A multidisciplinary science is a science where two sciences come together to share their findings. When we talk about interdisciplinary science, we talk about two sciences when they not only share their findings, they also share their methods. But when we talk about a transdisciplinary science, it's just not sharing finding or sharing methodology, it's creating a new methodology. It's actually solving a new source of problem through certain approaches where many sciences come together. So when we teach science of happiness in IT, we have electrical engineer, we have anatomist, we have got neurophysiologist, we have psychologist, we have got, a host of, we have communication scientists, we have got art and literature people. So a band of 13 faculty, we have been trying to develop the science of happiness. And I being the advisor for this center, the job is to make sure that it reaches to a level, not to prove that it's a science, but to identify certain principles so that we can replicate it in the population in general. So this is the differences that I created with Martin Seligman. I said that in a country of 1.4 billion, we cannot think of having individual happiness on several parameters that you suggest. We would like to create mass happiness, and from there we can come to individual forms of happiness. So it's a transdisciplinary science. We call it as a transcultural phenomenon because happiness is perceived, experienced, expressed, every culture, and it's a translational domain that if you really can identify those principles, you can translate it into a formal process. So with this note, let me tell you, when we teach science of happiness, we call it as a context-based subject matter. We do not fix a syllabus for that. We do not call it as a content-based subject matter. It's all about the context. And the context, if it comes along with the content and intent, it becomes a subject matter of people's choice. So the idea of developing this science was to help people develop coping style. More than their lifestyle. So how best they can cope with the environment. Not that this is the only science of coping style. In fact, there are many others. We are just trying to make sure that this also finds some path in the mind of the people who suffers from some kind of coping difficulties. We call it as a more introspective science. We neither try to describe who is a happy person, nor try to prescribe how to be happy. So it's more of an insight and awareness rather than trying to make people feeling having pleasant experience or having some degree of comfort or peace. And finally, it's a choice-based commitment. That is, people must have a choice for this and a self-driven engagement. With this note that we actually take care in teaching our students, we go to the guiding philosophy of it. So our guiding philosophy is that in science of happiness, we are interested more in life more than career. We believe that career is within life, life is not within career. So science of happiness gives us a much bigger perspective of life. As I said, it's more of a context rather than content. So the students create the context and we create the content out of it. It's more about nurturing our attitude over our aptitude. Well, we have been teaching very talented students. Aptitude is never a problem for us in India. It's the mindset or the attitude. More than the mind, we are interested in mindset. That is how we can actually proliferate nurture their attitude. And as I said, it's more of a choice over compulsion. So my the guiding philosophy with these guiding principles before I actually enter into the question session. I'll raise questions rather than trying to answer those questions. Is that it's a science of insight, awareness, and innovation. We call it a more cognitive science, just not calmness, peace, or comfort. We call it as an attempt to build the best for the future than to repair the worst in the past. We are not interested or masking whatever anxiety we have. I mean, by reducing our unhappiness, we cannot expect that people become happy automatically. That's the science we try to believe. And an effort to create happiness for others just to be happy. We don't want to be happy. Our idea is that create happiness for others, you will be happy automatically. If you chase it, you will never get it. So it's a process, a journey. It's not a destination. I'm sorry. It's a process. It's not a target. It's a journey, not a destination. So our idea is to make people happy in the process rather than trying to achieve a target, or neither to fulfill a particular dream or destination, which we call the journey will actually make you happy rather than when you actually become happy. So when you get a job that you are dreaming of, after getting job within a month, you become unhappy once again. So that's what is our understanding. So with these notions, let me come out with some territories that we are trying to deal with. So from hereafter, in next 10 to 12 slides, I'll be raising more questions, only questions, rather than finding answers, because we are at a very nascent state of developing this science of happiness. First of all, whether it is a science or practice, does science explain happiness? Well, there are many ways to tell. I just gave an example of whether happiness can be considered as a part of our cognitive, insightful awareness, ability to reorient ourselves, or it's a science of calm, peace, and pleasurable experiences. If it is part of our cognition, yes, science does explain it. Is it a genotype or a phenotype? Do we have a gene for happiness? Yes. In fact, if you read the book of the biology of belief, the best of the molecular biologists today say that the protein expressions take place based on your belief. So yes, there may be a genotype which sets our limit, but within that limit, we can actually go limitlessly to make ourselves happy. Whether it is a process or an outcome, when actually we feel happy. So when Daniel Kahneman says that it's the moment, not the memory. So Daniel Kahneman's theory is more about a market theory. Question is whether we are happy at a given moment based on what is going to happen to me, or it's based on our good memories. Whether it is a thinking or a blinking, that is a feeling or a cognition. So when I say blinking is actually a process of intuition. It's a process of feeling. Or thinking is a process of cognition. And then whether it is a mind or a mindset. What sort of world is this? Even in Martin Seligman's, one of his research scholars, now a professor, of course, talks about the primal belief. That is, we have certain primal beliefs. Those primal beliefs actually guide us whether we will be happy ultimately or not. And the primal belief is that whether the world is perceived as good or bad, world is perceived as secure or insecure. So these are the two primal beliefs he suggests, that is, his student suggests, now a professor, as I said, his name is Clifton. He suggests that those primal beliefs are also guided by some kind of genetic influences, and that determines our mindset. We have got a beautiful mind, but it is the mindset that finds expression for our mind. So with this note, let me start with these questions. The first question, therefore, whether happiness is a choice or a compulsion. Now, I have shown you a photograph. The photograph is of it's a couple from Ukraine. Much before the war had started, at least 3 years back. They were getting separated. They thought that they will compel themselves to be happy. So they handcuffed themselves for 123 days. And after 123 days, they felt that even their personal hygiene was maintained in the washroom with the handcuffed on, because they did not have the key. They threw the key away. So after 123 days, they felt that no, probably choice would be better for our happiness. I'm not going to give you an answer. I simply wanted to tell that this is a valid question for us, whether we we want to be happy. Okay. If we want to be happy, is it part of our choice or is it part of our compulsion? That sets out our second question. If it is a choice, then why so many people are unhappy in this world? Well, in India, we have got 1.4 billion people. And if you see the map, and if you see the World Happiness Report says that India's standing is 133 out of 156 countries in World Happiness Report of 2021. Question is that if we all believe that happiness is a choice, then why can't we be happy? So whether affluence determines our happiness or our autonomy gives us happiness. Now for the West, the talk that we have just listened to is a brilliant talk actually. We listened to that for them, it is the standard of living that or the affluence, biological, psychological, social, economic resources that give them happiness. But for us, it is the social relations, the autonomy. I may have very little money, but I have the autonomy to make use of it the way I would like. So if I get the autonomy, probably I'll be happier, probably, but that's not a final answer. The answer needs to be given by people who are actually interested in the field of science of happiness. We are promoting such questions for future research program. My third question is that, shall we have more choices to become happy? I mean, Sonia Suchday actually have this question. If we get more choices, if we go to a supermarket and we get the photograph that you see, an olive oil of 2 different brands, and we keep on thinking which I must take. You can take any one of these, but we keep on thinking about it. So if you have got more choices, people say that you will have more cognitive stress on you. And we fail to realize the difference between best choices and right choices. Best choice is the choice for which there should be no alternative. You got one job and that's the best choice. But if you have got 5 jobs and if you have to choose one, you don't know what would be the best for you. So you will continue to suffer out of it. You will not try to get something which will actually satisfy your internal motive. And the moment you take one job, you start feeling that other jobs would have been better. We call it apprehension of hypothetical missed opportunity, that you feel that the other jobs that you did not take would have been better. That brings my next question. Are we naturally happy? What our chairperson was just saying, the genotype or phenotype. I mean, there are a lot of confusion about it. Now, people believe, I can give you an example. Very recently, we did some research on that. Our students did it. We thought that disabled people are unhappy. Very surprisingly, we found the world literature also supports us. The disabled people are happier than able people. And a lot of people say that it is simply because the hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation that you cannot be perpetually unhappy or you cannot be perpetually unhappy unless you are diseased or depressed. You cannot be perpetually happy even if you get a couple of lottery tickets which you cannot exhaust throughout your lifetime. You will become poor in another 6 months. You will become another ordinary man even after getting 2 consecutive lottery tickets. So is it a genotype or is it a phenotype? Are we naturally happy or are we happy for certain contextually driven phenomena? Can money buy happiness? That's a big question. Of course, Daniel Kahneman suggests that yes, money can. Daniel Kahneman, who got Nobel Prize 2004 on this subject matter, he says that he gave the example. He did a study through Gallup agencies on over 4 lakh Americans. And he found that $75,000 and above, if people earn money per year, that doesn't add to their happiness. That adds to their life satisfaction, but nothing to their happiness. He says that happiness is momentary. If you already are getting $75,000 and if you get $80,000 by your promotion, It does not add to your happiness, but it only simply says that, well, you have done well, it gives you life satisfaction. Satisfaction is a long-term event, but it does not give you any short-term benefit. So, question is, can money be a part of well-being or ill-being? I have given this example of this rickshawala. This rickshawala is, he used to live close to my house in Delhi while I was in DRDM. And I found that every day he is saluting me, saying that, sir, namaste, namaste. So one day I found that he is walking with me, and I asked him this question: why not you up in pulling rickshaw today? So he said that, well, Bauji, today I have earned already 600 rupees. So I told him that, well, it's still daytime, you can earn a little more so that you can save something for tomorrow. The answer was that, Bauji, is your choice. It's your problem, not your problem, not my problem. Tomorrow I'll earn another 600 rupees. Let me go to my house, eat a couple of rotis with my family, and that would give me much more happiness. So can money buy happiness, or can relationship replace money? That's a question also put forward for people who would be interested in. What makes me happy, then memory or moment? Now, we won World Cup sometime, T20 World Cup. You ask people, what is their answer to it? Is it the moment that makes you happy? Is it the memory that makes you happy? Or is it the amalgamation of both? Actually, they are not. If you are concentrating on moment, you will not be able to derive any benefit from the memory. If you are trying to derive the benefit from memory, you will not be able to enjoy the moment. That's a great controversy. But this controversy is actually linked more to market theory, what Daniel Kahneman also suggests, that market theory is more by moment, and its happiness is all about moment. When we talk about memory, it's nothing but life experience or history of life experience or some kind of satisfaction. Are we unhappy because of hypothetical missed choices? That is, what kind of standard I have. That is self-standard or a comparative standard. So more often we found that, well, I may have been doing very well. My standard has been pretty good. I may have been very satisfied, but I become unhappy because I compare myself with others. So the moment I find, suppose in my IIT students also I get, that, well, they have been doing otherwise pretty well, but they always have a thought in the back of their mind that had they been to medical sciences, probably they would have done better, because they believe that they are better raw material, and wherever they will go, they will be able to, do pretty well. So that's a kind of repentance people perpetuate in their, thought process, without realizing that how far it is actually harming their progressive health. So we are always unhappy because of hypothetical missed choices, which we have never attained. Actually, we never availed. But we think that we should have done that, and as a result of which we suffer by ourselves. So comparative or self-standard, which standard gives us a better sense of happiness? My next question is more related to Martin Seligman. Is it not all right to have bad choices in life at times? I mean, people always say that, well, be hopeful always, optimism. Those who would be interested in this field, I would like them to read a book by Tali Sarot, who says that if you are too hopeful, that probably costs you much more dearly. That is optimism bias. And if you are having optimism bias, then you will suffer much more as compared to what you feel in terms of helplessness. So it's always better to have bad choices in life at times, because we need to experience all shades of emotion in our life. If we are always happy, then probably we will not even survive, because our survival started with fight and flight. If our survival started with fight and flight, And if we never try to experience them, in case of danger, we will not be able to help us survive. So the idea is that whether we should have all spectrums of emotions, happy, sad, fear, and the surprise discussed, or we will always try to be happy and hopeful. Now, this is where I differed with Martin Seligman as well. It's always good to have some bad choices in life. It's always better. Then also a concept of between Western and Indian way of thinking. What makes us happy? If I can control something, that would be happy. Or if I believe that, well, whatever happiness is coming to me is all due to God. Like if I listen to someone from UK or US or Canada, they always say that, well, I did it and I'm happy because I got the award. But when we get the award, we say it is the God which has given us. I mean, we don't give credit to ourselves. And if we find difficulty, even in disasters, I mean, calamities, I have seen people don't suffer that much because they believe that they are actually suffering for their last life sins. So they believe that no point in suffering because God wanted me to suffer, so I am suffering. So is it the personal control or is it the negotiable fate, which actually makes us happy? Remember, none of these questions, none of these points, none of these words I have taken from any source. These things I created for the benefit of the students so that they can come out with some project ideas. They can come up with some research ideas. They can come out with some scientific thoughts, because as long as there is no conflict, you would not be able to gear towards developing a thought. Do failed choices prevent us from being happy? That I made some failed choices and that's why I am happy. Question is whether we should be forgetful to something which is very embarrassing to me, or whether we should be forgiving. Whether we should try to forget or whether we should try to forgive someone who has actually created difficulty for you. I think if you try to forget something deliberately, is the other name of remembrance. Instead, if we can forgive, we can unload our stress to a great extent. That's my belief only. But of course, people also suggest if I go by a Freudian theory, then probably repression will help you get rid of some of the very embarrassing conditions in your lifetime. So it's a question whether failed choices prevent us from being happy, whether we should be forgetful if something is very embarrassing, or whether we should be forgiving time. I'm coming to my close, and I mean, one or two more slides, then I can stop. How do I get happiness then? Through betweenness or withenness? That if it is a matter of relationship, then I say the betweenness. We are a family-centric country where collectivism is the greatest benefit to all of us. We sacrifice our identity for the benefit of the integrity. We sacrifice much more if others are benefited. And the greatest examples are our mothers. I mean, they sacrifice everything for their children, and yet they are happy. So whether it is the withenness that gives us happiness, whether I should try to be happy, or whether I should create happiness for others. So the photograph that you see, as the oldest woman in the world, and she was being interviewed. And there are similar studies that has been continued since 1937 at Harvard University. 90 years gone, those studies is still continuing. And the final outcome that has come up after 90 years of studies, longitudinal studies of different progenies, they all finally narrated that it is the relationship or the betweenness which makes us happy. It's just not becoming withenness. So finally, happy people are no different from others. That's my speculation. They simply process information different. It's ordinary magic. You don't need to know the rocket science in order to be happy. You have to process information different. You have to have your mindset different. You have to have your attitude different. So happiness is a choice. Some pursue it, others create it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mandal. As you have set the note in the beginning, that science of happiness has to be, introspective in the sense, and throughout your lecture, you have been interrogative and making the dialogic presentation. And I think we have been able, at least all those who are listening to this talk, they will definitely be exploring themselves innerness. And the last note that this is for everyone, and this is something ordinary, and anybody can have the happiness. The context of the choices you have taken so largely, that if you have choices, then this is very good. If you have more choices, still more happiness, or you should be able to make best choice. Should it be good, or whether you will be able to bad choices and even failed choices. I think this is a very, very good horizon, and people can go from right beginning to the anyone. It's very good that the choice the rickshaw wala has decided that 600 rupees are very good. He can make a choice to go back to home.
Yes. He was very happy. Actually, he says that, well, बाबूजी ये तो आपकी प्रॉब्लम है, हमें छोड़ दो, हमें घर जाने दो, 2 रोटी खाने दो.
Certainly, certainly. So I'm sure that there must be a few questions with those who are attending this address. Shilpa, can we take a few questions? We have 5 to 10 minutes because Professor Mandal has already set a note for the question answers.
Yes, sir. So actually there are 2 questions. One is, which is for Professor Sonia, and the other which is for Professor Manas Mandal. So so I'll ask the question for Professor Manas Mandal first, and then maybe we can go back to Dr. Sonia. So Dr. Sapna Bhatt, she wants to know in detail about the course which sir was just talking about in the beginning, the science of happiness. And she wants to know that if she wants to join the course, is there any process for applying?
Well, there is a SWAN platform. Science of Happiness course is running. Over 10,000 students have already enrolled. And I can send the link, and anybody can join. But those who are IIT students, they have the privilege of attending offline courses. And we also run several seminars, workshops, and outreach program, training program. I can pass on this information to you, and if you like, you can definitely join.
And so there's another question from Wilson, and he is requesting you to please explain the difference between art of happiness and science of happiness. That is one question. And his second question is, what is your take on the formula of happiness proposed by Dr. Martin Seligman, where H is equal to S plus C plus V?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the second first. Now, Dr. Seligman is a much bigger person, and he spent his life on happiness research. I cannot argue with him. The idea of having a formula, I guess instead of going by a formula, this is my personal take, that we should understand the process. That the process may be highly individualized, or process may be embedded in the cultural context of the people where you live in. So what gives you the best of the happiness is the priority that I should set. Is it the duty? Is it the family? Is it the career? What gives me most happiness? Is it the interest? Is it the ability? Is it my expectation? What gives me most happiness? Is it my value? Is it my aspiration? Is it the reality? What gives me happiness? Is the priority that I have to set in. And once I set the priority, and then definitely I can follow a particular process. More often, we fail to set the priority and suffer in confusion that what I should do first. If I'm doing a duty, I have my family as well, I have my career as well. So the question is, more often we are unhappy because we don't set the priority. And as a result of which, what happens? We suffer in some kind of happiness. So he has his own formula. We teach about his theories as well. And his position is that, well, what he precisely wants to say that, well, there is a limit, that is, there is a boundary given by the genetics, but context plays a role. And as I said, within the limit set by your gene, you can actually be happy limitlessly. So what the Bruce Lipton has been saying, a recent work on the biology of belief, that you may have all these genetic components to be happy or unhappy, but which protein is going to be unfolded depends on the kind of hormone you're actually releasing. There are two kinds of hormone, he says, growth hormone and protection hormone. If you are always trying to see the negative part of it, you will release the protection hormone. If you are always seeing the better side of it, you will release the growth hormone. So growth hormone will actually have a different combination of interaction within your visceral system. If it is a protection hormone, you will actually remain unhappy over a period of time. So it's a complex interplay, but the interplay is not something, is something which the people who do research are to understand. For people in general, it's very important that they learn how to process good things and why we should not be too happy. That is optimism bias. If you create optimism bias for yourself, if you believe that, well, I smoke cigarette, nothing will happen to me, but all others are smoking cigarette, they will have cancer. I mean, it's an optimism bias. So happiness is a flavor. Happiness is a flavor. It must be percolated to others. If you can create happiness for others, you remain happy all over, all the time. If you try to be happy by yourself, maybe we are making a wild goose chase. That's the point I wanted to make.
Answer the difference between art of happiness and science of
art of happiness. Of course, art of happiness is a, for example, through spirituality, I can develop happiness. Now, art of happiness is highly individualized. I mean, my way of looking at happiness. Now, science of happiness is no different from art of happiness. They are complementary part of it. We simply try to understand the principles behind it. Once we understand the principle behind it, it fortifies the strength of art of happiness. So art of happiness is much bigger, much more pervasive. That if we understand the art of happiness, we can actually have certain control over it. But science of happiness is just not to give certain scientific principles how to become happy. It's more of an introspective investigation only, without making any prescription. We simply try to understand the process behind it, the dynamics of it. And that's why we try to create certain models. And those models are actually, we are creating, we have three models. The model of affluence, model of autonomy, model of appreciation. The affluence is the biological, psychological, social, economic affluence, how much you have, the living standard. The autonomy is that how much flexibility you have, whatever little you have with you. So 600 rupees for the rickshawala, that may be very little, but he has all the flexibility to make use of it. I may be getting 6 lakh rupees, but I do not have the flexibility to do that. So how much autonomy you have. And appreciation is something, you may not have affluence, you may not have autonomy, but you can still love the life. You are suffering, but you still can. That's my first photograph that I showed you in Rajasthan. Children are smiling. They do not have anything, yet they are happy. So disabled children, they have got a lot of difficulties, except structural barrier. They're happy otherwise. So the question is, science of happiness to understand the underlying principles behind it. And it does not have any confrontation with art of happiness. It's a different way of practicing. So we must honor the respective strength of each one of this.
Right.
They are more complementary, not compatible. Don't try to understand the comparability and compatibility between these two. The complementarity between these two is to be understood in order to be really happy. Thank you.
And so the next question is Bhagyashi. She wants to know your thoughts on the happiness experience or definition of happiness for individuals across different stages of life.
This question is for me.
Yes, sir.
Well, for example, I find happiness through my students. when I've been teaching for last 42 years. Okay, of course I held different military positions as well, but I found happiness everywhere. And the question of happiness, the one principle that I follow all through, that if I can create happiness for others, I'll maintain my own level of happiness as well. But I am not interested in becoming happy all the time, because I would like to be I am experiencing all shades of emotions: happy, sad, fear, anger, surprise, disgust. Everything is needed for our survival. Everything. And if I fail to capitalize the strength that God has given to me, then I would really not be happy to that extent. In order to get the spiritual happiness, what Madam was saying, I would try to create a linear thought for you. Look, whenever we see something in the world, the input come information becomes information. When we process information, it becomes knowledge. When we use knowledge, it becomes experience. When we exercise experience, we understand truth. When we understand truth, we find wisdom. When we exercise wisdom, we find bliss. And from bliss, we go to eternal happiness. That kind of eternal happiness is the spiritual happiness we are not talking about. I'm talking about how people should get rid of the daily hassles and how we can make them see things in a better form. We are not talking about that level of happiness. So idea behind this happiness, science of happiness, is to develop a coping style. People talk about lifestyle. I'm interested more in about the coping style. How best we can help people to cope with the problems with the day-to-day situation. But what I realized, by reducing your level of unhappiness, you cannot make somebody happy all the time. You need to have both sides of the coin. They are very complementary to each other. I need to be unhappy as well in order to, the pain is inevitable, but whether you suffer or not, that's your choice. We all need to have pain. Suffering is optional. That's the point I wanted to make. And at every stage, actually, we undergo some pain. But whether I will suffer or not, that's, of course, your choice.
There are a few more questions.
Sure, I can answer if you like.
One question is on your take on the construct of satisfaction when it comes to happiness.
Well, that's not my construct. Actually, that's Daniel Kahneman's satisfaction. He actually divided this construct. One part is moment, which is memory. Other is life satisfaction, which is a long-term experience. He says that, well, if you have got some money, like $75,000 he referred about, anything below that, any percentage of share that you get in addition to what you are getting will give you happiness. But after that, it doesn't add much about your happiness. It's all about your life satisfaction. Life satisfaction is a long-term happiness, and happiness is a short-term life satisfaction. That's what he suggested. So, the scale on which the World Happiness Foundation has actually, not World Happiness Foundation, World Happiness Report has been constructed by John Halliwell, is actually based on the database on both emotion, that is happiness, and life satisfaction. These are two different constructs they have utilized. So happiness depends on your life events day to day. That is, on Sunday you become happy, on Monday you get Monday blues, because it's a momentary happiness. But after retirement, if you think how happy I was all through my lifetime, it's more of a life satisfaction, whether you are actualized or not. So that's the take on life satisfaction. It's a long-term happiness is called life satisfaction. That's what Daniel Kahneman suggested. I don't want to forcefully enter into that argument, but well, I accept that as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And so Shivangi asks, sir, if we talk about India, how can we create awareness for the process of happiness at the mass level?
Well, that's a big challenge. I want everybody's help, because as of now, we have introduced science of happiness courses to 17 institutions throughout the country. thousands of students are undergoing it, and we are running SWAM courses for that, Designs of Happiness as well. But that is meant only for people who are in the field of academics. I think if we have got mission health mission, if we have got Clean India mission, if we have got Digital India mission, if we have got Stand Up Startup India mission, we can have Happiness India mission as well. Why can't we have a mission of happiness? And that happiness mission is all about our mindset. It's not about our mind. We know that we have a beautiful mind. But how about our mindset? How about our attitude? How about our attitude towards life? How about our attitude towards others? The change in the, for example, Clean India mission, you can spend thousands of crores, but as long as you don't change the attitude of the people, I mean, as long as you don't help them get rid of their, conflicts, whether I should, for example, all jobs, all life events, all career in India are determined by aptitude. And the greatest misconception that we have, that intelligent people can do everything. That's the greatest misconception that we have. Where you actually get your job through your attitude. Wherever you get your idea of mindset, we don't get it. Therefore, it's very difficult to come out of that mindset of that intelligence here can create everything. And therefore, we are creating more career, less of life. That's the reason I say career is within life. Life is not within career.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Suchday.
Shilpa, I think we have to conclude now. And if there are more questions, then probably I don't think there will be any more time for that.
So there's just one question for Sonia Suchday, Professor. She's been waiting.
Yes, she's waiting. Let the question be put to her. Yeah.
Yes. So someone has asked that most of our clients are religious, but practicing spiritual psychology is not appreciated in the majority forum. Does this prejudice have an effect on the contemporary mental health models?
Mental health models that don't take into account something that is so central to human experience will always be incomplete. Any mental health model that doesn't take into account anything that is important to human beings. Because you can't really study the human being without taking into account all of the concepts that matter. So I guess that's a short answer to the question.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And Professor Rajbir Singh, with your permission, can I ask just one more question?
Yes.
So, sir, there's a question for you. Someone has asked you to, explain if how genetic factors affect happiness, although you've covered it while answering one of the questions. But
well, we have got almost identical genetic pools. We may be having some variations in our genetic system, but whatever little we have, I think that is enough to make us happy for 100 years. I mean, there is no reason. But if we believe that we would live happily 100 years, that probably is a wrong conceptualization. Being a happy mind, I don't call me myself a very happy person, but I believe that I must understand, must go through all shades of emotions: happy, sad, fear, anger, surprise, disgust. So the gene pool is meant for all these basic emotions. So I've been trained by Paul Ekman and Carl Lizard, the people who did emotion research, and it is their notion that too, that gene may have its own limit, but whether a particular gene will unfold in terms of having some kind of protein expressions, which is the functional component of it, depends on how you activate it. If you activate your growth hormone, you will be able to see things differently. If you activate, under stress, it would be very difficult for you to do that. But under stress also, a lot of people can bounce back very easily. They believe that they need to be happy, and as long as they are not happy, they will keep striving. So they become resilient in the process. So resilience has got no genetic bearing. This has been experimentally proved. So resilience is more about an attitude, is more about a mindset. That mindset we need to create, that failure is not orthogonal to success. Failure is always a learning experience. And if we accept that, in life, success and failure will keep coming, and we must enjoy both. Given an opportunity at this stage of my life, I would be happy to accept more failure than success, because success is always a full stop. We are all belonging to academic circle. Let me give you a small example before I go out, is that if you have published a paper, you will not even remember the abstract of it. If your paper has not been published, you will remember every word of it. The reason is very simple, that failure makes you learn. Success forces you to forget. Failure gives you root. Success gives you wings. We cannot have wings without having our root. So root is very important. Unhappiness is very important. We began our life with fight and flight. So we can't forget that as well. So happiness is just not about to become happy all the time. Happiness is about getting opportunity to experience all shades of emotion in life. That's what is my take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Rajbir Singh.
At the outset, I would like to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed personally both the talks, the learned talks, the very intellectual level talks, and even reaching to the layman's level. I think everyone, student, teachers, whosoever are joining this effort of the NPPA, I think that this is a very successful moment that we have been able to touch, which are very, very basic at the core of the positive psychology concepts. And certainly it has been clear that if we want to make this world happy, certainly that would also be requiring a level of spirituality, of course, because if you are not growing on that spirit axis, we will not be able to reach to the happiness. But thou happiness is a very, very common man's and ordinary man's person, and we all are happy. It is one of the best evidence that we all have genes. And Professor Mandal has mentioned the concept of memory also. Once you have experienced the happiness, it all goes to your depository. And whenever the coping mechanisms can be helpful with your own depository of the happy moments, and the savoring sort of concept is being used in therapy these days, that whatever happy moments you savor, you can recall them at the time of some bad events, and it neutralizes many a times. So the memory is something so well. And there was some very basic issues. Whenever every year I also see that the number of my country on that happiness index is so poor, but I do not find that much of disgust and anger and despair in the society all around. I am not actually okay with that kind of index. And certainly we need to have some other kind of aspect. And whether it is the art or science of happiness, the constructs are slowly proved. This is in case of all sciences. So happiness as a construct is becoming more founded with the science concepts now. And yes, as Professor Mandal said, that if it has to be taken to the mass level and it has to be taken as a mission, I think we have to create some vocation, some profession, or some jobs, creating happiness, system. So some people are dedicated to this kind of thing, that they are always involved in creating happiness for others, and we're paying for them, and actually they're engaged for it. So of course, any subject, when in the beginning it goes at the academic level, it has to slowly go to the vocational and the employability level. And I'm sure that it will not be very far ahead that, there are happiness ministries are being created all over the world, and in India too. I'm sure that also. Yes. So that is one step ahead, and I'm sure that we are not very much far away from the Florentine moments. and many people will be experiencing happiness, and it would certainly increase the productivity and a number of other things. It would make things easy for the governance also. So the talk as well, both the things were very nice, and I'm very thankful to both the speakers for their learned presentations. For the, it will also certainly help to take the positive psychology away. Professor Mandal, we hardly know 25 years, 30 years back that positive psychology would be making so much of inroads in all branches of psychology, and even the hardcore psychoanalysis. Everybody is experiencing it. So I am very sure that in very near future, we'll also see that the science of happiness will also be practiced definitely all around. It will be one of the major objective too.
Sir, just to mention that the government of MP has created a ministry for it. I am attached to that. Even Delhi schools, they have Delhi ministry has also started. In Abu Dhabi, they have started. In UK, there are ministries of happiness. They actually created a separate cabinet ministry for that. So there are reasons to create that people understand that it is not the money and living standard can make people happy. There are other ways too as well. But before we leave, thank you so much, sir, for chairing this session. And I'm also very impressed with Shilpa.
Yes. She has helped us to conduct this session very well. So thank you both of you, Sonia as well as Mandal. Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you, NPPA, that it was a very, very nice session. And it will also help us to achieve the objectives of the Association of Positive Psychology in the country. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Rajbir Singh, Professor Sonia, and of course, Professor Manas Mandal. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today and for sharing your insights, knowledge with all of us and helping us learn more about different aspects of the field of psychology, positive psychology in particular. We now move to the next session, and I now invite Dr. Pooja to please take over as the moderator for the next session. We have a symposium which is slated for the next session, which is going to be a more practitioner-oriented view and perspective. So, Dr. Pooja, if you could please take over.